March 15, 1987. Marcus Williams had been heavyweight champion of the world for 3 years. That night, walking home from his mother's house in Louisville's West End, he heard the screams from Baxter Avenue. 5 white men, baseball bats, 1 black man on the ground begging for his life. Marcus stopped. He was 6'4", 230 pounds of muscle. He could have ended it in 30 seconds. Instead, he turned around and walked away. Told himself it wasn't his fight. The man died that night. Jerome Washington, father of 2. For 35 years, Marcus carried that weight, built a gym to train kids, told himself he was making amends. What he didn't know was that Jerome's son had been watching him all these years, waiting, planning, and now the son was ready to collect what Marcus owed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hook. The Louisville Metro Police found Marcus Williams unconscious in his gym at 11:47 p.m., blood pooling beneath his split skull. Detective Sarah Chen would later note that whoever did this knew exactly where to hit, hard enough to drop a former heavyweight champion, precise enough to keep him breathing. Marcus came to in the ambulance, vision blurred, the taste of copper flooding his mouth. Through the haze of concussion, one image burned clear, a young man's face, maybe 25, with Jerome Washington's eyes staring down at him as the Louisville Slugger connected with his temple. "Jerome's boy," Marcus whispered, and the paramedic leaned closer. "What's that, champ?" But Marcus had already drifted back under, the sirens fading into the memory of screams from 35 years ago. 3 days later, Marcus stood in his empty gym, touching the bandaged gash that ran from his left ear to his jawline. The police had found no signs of forced entry. Whoever attacked him had a key or knew someone who did. The thought made his hands shake, not from fear, but from the familiar rage he'd spent decades learning to bury. Thunder's Boxing Academy sat in the heart of Louisville's West End, sandwiched between a soul food restaurant and a check-cashing place that had been robbed 4 times in 2 years. Marcus had bought the building in 1995 with money from his last fight, back when his hands still worked and his name still meant something. Now the gym was his penance, his attempt to balance the scales. 43 kids trained here, mostly black boys from the projects, a few white kids whose parents drove them in from the suburbs, thinking boxing would teach their sons discipline. What Marcus taught them was simpler, how to hit back when the world came for them. He walked to the heavy bag where he'd been found, ran his fingers along the chain. A folded piece of paper had been tucked between the links. The police had missed it, or maybe it hadn't been there before. Marcus unfolded it with steady hands. "You let my father die. Now you know how it feels to be helpless. This is just the beginning. D. Washington." Marcus stared at the note until the letters blurred. D. Washington. Dante, maybe. Or David. Jerome had 2 kids. Marcus remembered that much from the newspaper article he'd read and reread until the words burned into his memory. The boy would have been 8 when his father died. Old enough to remember, old enough to hate. The gym door chimed, and Marcus quickly pocketed the note. His assistant trainer, Tommy Rodriguez, walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of a man delivering bad news. "How you feeling, champ?" "Like I got hit with a baseball bat." Marcus accepted the coffee, grateful for the warmth against his palms. "What's the word on the street?" Tommy set down his cup and pulled out his phone. "You're not gonna like this." The video was grainy, shot from across the street through the gym's front windows. It showed Marcus being beaten, but the angle made it impossible to identify the attacker. What made Marcus's blood run cold wasn't what the video showed. It was where Tommy had found it. "World Star Hip Hop posted it this morning," Tommy said. "Already got 500,000 views. Comments are, well, they're split. Half the people saying you deserved it, half saying it's a damn shame. Nobody knows why it happened, but everybody's got theories." Marcus scrolled through the comments, his jaw tightening with each cruel speculation. Former champ got soft, probably owed money to the wrong people. What goes around comes around. "There's more," Tommy said. "Channel 32 wants an interview, so do the others. And your phone's been ringing all morning. I didn't answer, but I recognize some of the numbers. Promoters mostly, vultures." Marcus handed back the phone. Turn it off, all of it. Marcus, you can't just... I said turn it off. The words came out harder than Marcus intended, and Tommy stepped back. In the silence that followed, Marcus could hear the echo of his father's voice, the same tone that had driven him to boxing in the first place. Anything to get out of that house, away from that anger. I'm sorry, Marcus said. It's just, this ain't about publicity, this is personal. Tommy nodded slowly. The Washington thing. Marcus looked up sharply. How did you... Man, I've known you for 15 years. You think I never noticed how you get every March 15th? How you disappear for a few days, come back looking like you've been wrestling with ghosts? Tommy's voice was gentle but firm. I did the math a long time ago. Question is, what you gonna do about it now? Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, but the message made his blood freeze. Tomorrow night, Baxter Avenue. Same spot where you let him die. Come alone, or I start visiting your kids at the gym. Marcus stared at the screen as the words sank in. 35 years of running, of trying to build something good from the wreckage of his cowardice, and it all came down to this. Jerome Washington's son wanted his pound of flesh, and Marcus was finally out of places to hide. The question was whether he'd find the courage to face what was coming, or if he'd run again. This time, there would be consequences either way. Marcus turned the phone face down, but the words burned in his mind like a brand. Or I start visiting your kids at the gym. The threat wasn't abstract. These walls held everything he'd built, everyone he'd sworn to protect. What is it? Tommy's voice seemed to come from underwater. Marcus looked around the gym, really seeing it for the first time in days. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts above the canvas ring. The smell hit him, leather, sweat, and the industrial disinfectant he used to mop the floors every night. This place had been his sanctuary for 15 years, the one corner of the world where his past couldn't reach him. Nothing, Marcus said, sliding the phone into his pocket. Just spam. Tommy's expression said he didn't buy it, but before he could push, the front door chimed again. Maria Santos walked in, her nurse scrubs wrinkled from a double shift at University Hospital. She moved with the careful precision of someone who'd been on her feet for 16 hours, but her eyes immediately found Marcus's bandaged face. Jesus, Marcus, you look worse than my patients. Feel worse, too. He managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maria had been bringing her nephew Carlos to the gym for 2 years now, ever since the boy's father got arrested for dealing. The kid was 13, all elbows and anger, but Marcus had seen something familiar in his eyes. The same desperate hunger he'd carried at that age. Carlos is in the car, Maria said. He's been asking about you all week. Kid barely slept after he heard what happened. Through the front window, Marcus could see the boy pressed against the passenger side glass, his face tight with worry. Carlos Santos was one of the success stories. Grades up, attitude improved, finding his way through boxing instead of the streets. Marcus had been teaching him to read his opponents, to think 3 moves ahead. Now the boy looked small and fragile, reminded that the adults he trusted could bleed. Bring him in, Marcus said. Carlos burst through the door like he'd been shot from a cannon, his school backpack sliding off one shoulder as he rushed to Marcus's side. Mr. Marcus, are you okay? Tommy said you got jumped, but Miguel's cousin said it was on the internet and everybody was watching. Slow down, mijo. Marcus placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the tension vibrating through his small frame. I'm fine. Takes more than a knock on the head to put Old Thunder down. But Carlos wasn't fooled. His dark eyes studied the bandage, the bruising around Marcus's left eye, the way he held his ribs when he thought no one was looking. My mom says you can't trust anybody these days. Says even good people got enemies. The words hit closer than the boy could know. Marcus knelt down, ignoring the protest from his bruised body, until he was eye level with Carlos. Your mama's right about a lot of things, but you know what I learned in all my years fighting? Sometimes the scariest fights are the ones where you know exactly who you're up against. Is that what happened to you? You knew who did it? Marcus felt Maria's eyes on him, Tommy's too. 3 people who trusted him, who depended on him to be stronger than his demons. The weight of their faith felt heavier than any championship belt he'd ever worn. Sometimes, Marcus said carefully, old fights have a way of finding you, even when you think they're done. Carlos nodded like this made perfect sense. At 13, he already understood that violence was a language some people never stopped speaking. You gonna fight back? The question hung in the air like incense. Marcus glanced at Tommy, who was pretending to check equipment while obviously listening. Maria crossed her arms, her nurse's instincts reading the tension in the room like vital signs on a monitor. That depends, Marcus said, on whether running would keep you kids safe. You ain't gonna run, Carlos said with complete certainty. My uncle ran from the East Side Crips when I was little. Know what happened? They came after my cousin instead. You can't run from people like that, Mr. Marcus. They just keep coming until somebody stops them. Out of the mouths of babes. Marcus stood slowly, his back crackling like old leather. Through the windows he could see the familiar rhythms of the neighborhood. Kids walking home from school, old men playing dominoes outside the corner store, young mothers pushing strollers while keeping one eye on the street. This was his world. These were his people. Jerome Washington's son wanted to drag him back into the darkness, but Marcus had 43 reasons not to go quietly. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message that would probably tear another hole in the peace he'd built. But this time, Marcus didn't look. Instead, he watched Carlos wrap his hands with the careful precision Marcus had taught him, preparing for another lesson in how to hit back when the world came calling. Some fights chose you. The only question was whether you'd meet them standing up. Marcus watched Carlos work through his combinations on the speed bag, the rhythmic drumbeat filling the silence where answers should have been. The boy's form was getting better, elbows tight, breathing controlled, the kind of discipline that would serve him whether he stayed in the ring or just needed to survive the streets. The phone in Marcus's pocket felt like a loaded gun. Mr. Marcus? Carlos paused mid-combination. You teaching us about footwork today? Sure thing. Marcus stepped forward, grateful for the distraction, but his phone buzzed again, then again. The third buzz made Maria look up from where she was organizing the first aid kit. Somebody really wants to talk to you, she said. Marcus pulled out the phone, expecting another threat, another demand. Instead, he found 3 messages from the same number, not the one that had been tormenting him, but one he recognized with a sick twist in his stomach. Marcus, it's Detective Ray Morrison. I know we ain't talked in years, but I need to see you. It's about the Washington case. Found something in the old files. Something that changes everything. Don't meet with anyone until you talk to me. Trust me on this. Marcus stared at the screen until the words blurred. Ray Morrison had worked the Jerome Washington murder case 35 years ago, back when he was a young detective trying to make his mark. Marcus remembered him as thorough, relentless, the kind of cop who lost sleep over unsolved cases. They'd spoken twice, once the night after Jerome died, once a week later when Marcus had been too eaten up with guilt to give coherent answers. What's wrong? Tommy moved closer, reading the change in Marcus's expression. You look like you seen a ghost. Maybe he had. Marcus's hands trembled as he typed back, Ray. Thought you retired. The response came immediately, did. But some cases don't retire. Can you meet? Tonight? It's important. I need to step outside, Marcus said, already moving toward the door. Carlos, keep working that combination. Tommy, make sure he keeps his guard up. The late afternoon air was crisp, carrying the smell of fried chicken from the restaurant next door and exhaust from the endless stream of traffic on Broadway. Marcus found himself staring at the exact spot where he'd stood 35 years ago, watching Jerome Washington cross the street for the last time. He called Ray's number. Thunder? The voice was older, rougher around the edges, but unmistakably the same detective who'd tried to get Marcus to remember details he'd been too shocked to process. Ray, what's this about? Not over the phone. But Marcus, Jesus, I should have called you years ago. I should have... Ray's voice cracked. Look, can you meet me at Clifton's Diner, the one on Bardstown Road? I got files with me, evidence logs, stuff that was buried so deep I only found it when they digitized the archives. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. What kind of stuff? The kind that proves you weren't the only one there that night. The kind that shows someone else saw what happened to Jerome and never came forward. Someone who knew exactly who killed him and stayed quiet for 35 years. The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's sweaty palm. Who? Not over the phone. 1 hour. Clifton's. Back booth. And Marcus? Ray's voice dropped to a whisper. Bring someone you trust. What I got to show you. It's gonna hurt, but it's also gonna explain why Jerome Washington's son wants you dead. The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the normal world go about its business, while his own reality crumbled like old concrete. Someone else had been there. Someone had watched Jerome die and said nothing. For 35 years, Marcus had carried the weight of that night alone, believing himself a coward, building his entire life around the penance of his failure. But if Ray was right, if someone else had witnessed the murder and stayed silent, his phone buzzed one more time, the familiar unknown number, the one that had been threatening him, demanding he meet at Baxter Avenue where Jerome had died. Change of plans. I know you're talking to the cop. Doesn't matter. Meet me tonight at 11 p.m. or everyone you care about suffers. Starting with the Santos boy. Marcus spun around, eyes scanning the street frantically. Carlos's nephew. The phone had buzzed right after he'd stepped outside, which meant someone had been watching. Someone had seen him take Ray's call. Through the gym windows, he could see Carlos still working the speed bag, unaware that he'd just become a target. Maria was laughing at something Tommy had said, her whole face lighting up the way it did when she forgot to worry about the bills and her nephew's future and all the weight she carried. Marcus realized he was about to lose everything he'd spent 15 years building. But for the first time since Jerome Washington had died in his arms, he was also about to learn the truth. The question was whether the truth would set him free or destroy him completely. Marcus's legs moved without conscious thought, carrying him back into the gym where the familiar sounds of training continued. Leather hitting bags, feet shuffling across canvas, the steady rhythm of Carlos's combinations. But now every sound felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. Tommy. Marcus's voice came out steady despite the chaos in his chest. Need you to close up early tonight. Tommy looked up from adjusting the tension on the speed bag. What's going on? Family emergency. The lie tasted bitter, but the truth was too dangerous. Marcus watched Carlos execute a perfect left hook, the boy's face bright with concentration and pride. In 6 hours, that same face would be marked for violence if Marcus didn't show up at Baxter Avenue. He could run, take Maria and Carlos, drive to his sister's place in Nashville, disappear for a few weeks until this blew over. But Jerome Washington's son had been planning this for decades. He'd wait. And when they came back, when life demanded they return to jobs and school and the routines that kept them afloat, he'd be waiting. Mr. Marcus? Carlos had stopped hitting the bag. You look sick. Just tired, mijo. Marcus forced a smile. But hey, you're getting that hook down perfect. Your uncle would be proud. The mention of Carlos's father, locked up in LaGrange for the next 3 years, made the boy's smile falter. Marcus cursed himself for the slip. The kid didn't need any more reminders about men who disappeared from his life. Maria appeared beside them, her scrubs exchanged for jeans and a University of Louisville sweatshirt. Carlos, go get your backpack. I want to beat the traffic home. As the boy jogged toward the locker room, Maria stepped closer to Marcus. Her voice dropped to the whisper she used when delivering bad news to families in the hospital. Who was on the phone? Nobody important. Marcus. She touched his arm, and he realized his hands were shaking. I've seen enough scared men to know what fear looks like. What happened to you the other night wasn't random, was it? Before Marcus could answer, the gym door chimed. But instead of the familiar faces he expected, parents picking up kids, evening shift regulars, 3 men walked in. They moved wrong, too alert, eyes scanning the room like they were mapping exits instead of looking for someone to train with. Marcus felt Tommy tense beside him. These weren't boxers. The lead man was white, maybe 45, with the kind of build that came from prison yards instead of gyms. His companions flanked him naturally, and Marcus caught the telltale bulge of concealed weapons under their loose jackets. We're closing early, Marcus called out, stepping slightly in front of Maria. The lead man smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. That's too bad. Heard this was where Thunder Williams trained. always wanted to meet a legend. Something in his tone made Marcus's skin crawl. This wasn't random either. "Sorry, but you'll have to come back tomorrow." "Actually," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement, "I think we'll stay for a few minutes. My friends here are real interested in meeting some of your students, especially the young ones." Marcus saw Tommy's hand drift toward the aluminum baseball bat they kept behind the front desk. Maria had gone rigid beside him, her nurse's instincts recognizing danger the same way she'd identify symptoms of shock. "Carlos," Marcus called toward the locker room, keeping his voice level. "Stay back there for a minute." The lead man's smile widened. "Smart. But see, Thunder, we didn't come for the boy. Not tonight, anyway. We came to deliver a message. I'm listening. The man you're supposed to meet tonight at 11? He wanted you to know that calling in old friends won't help. Detective Morrison already got his warning to stay away from files that don't concern him. Real convincing warning, from what I hear." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "What did you do to Ray?" "Nothing permanent. Yet. But see, that's the beauty of having friends everywhere. Thunder, police, courts, city hall. Even in places like this." The man gestured around the gym with mock appreciation. "Real community spirit here. Be a shame if the health department found code violations. Or if child services heard rumors about unsafe conditions for minors." The threat was crystal clear. Not just violence, but the systematic destruction of everything Marcus had built. These weren't just street thugs. They were connected, organized, able to attack from multiple directions. Tommy stepped forward, bat now visible in his hands. "I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave." The three men laughed like he'd told a joke. The lead man reached into his jacket, and Marcus prepared to throw himself between the gun and his friends. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a cell phone. 11 p.m., Thunder, Baxter Avenue. Come alone, or tomorrow morning this neighborhood wakes up to some real ugly news. He showed Marcus the phone screen, a photo of Carlos walking out of school, completely unaware he was being watched. Then they were gone, leaving behind only the smell of cigarettes and the terrible knowledge that Marcus's safe harbor had been breached by forces he couldn't fight. In the locker room, Carlos was calling out, asking if it was safe to come out yet. Marcus realized he was about to find out exactly how much courage he had left. Marcus stood frozen as the door closed behind the three men, their laughter still echoing in the sudden silence. The normal sounds of the gym, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant traffic on Broadway, felt muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "It's okay, Carlos," he called toward the locker room, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "You can come out." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. The photo of Carlos walking out of school burned behind Marcus's eyes. How long had they been watching? How many pictures did they have of Maria leaving the hospital, of Tommy opening the gym each morning, of all the people whose only crime was trusting him? Carlos emerged with his backpack slung over one shoulder, his young face tight with questions. Who were those guys? They didn't look like boxers. Just some people looking for directions, Marcus lied, hating himself for it. The boy was 13, old enough to smell bullshit, old enough to recognize the kind of men who brought violence like weather. Maria wasn't buying it either. Her eyes stayed fixed on Marcus as she wrapped an arm around Carlos's shoulders. "We should go." "Yeah." Marcus watched them gather their things, memorizing details. The way Carlos's sneakers squeaked against the floor, how Maria's hair had escaped from her ponytail during her shift, the trust in both their faces despite the fear. After tonight, everything would be different. Either he'd be dead, or the truth about Jerome Washington would tear apart what was left of his life. Tommy waited until Maria and Carlos left before speaking. Those weren't debt collectors, no. And whatever happened to you the other night, it's connected to this. Marcus nodded, moving to the windows to watch Maria's Honda disappear into traffic. Somewhere out there, Jerome Washington's son was waiting. A man who'd grown up believing Marcus was responsible for his father's death. A man who'd spent decades planning this confrontation. "The night my career ended," Marcus said, still staring out at the street, "I told everyone I walked away from a fight. Let some white boys beat down an innocent man while I stood there like a coward. That's not what happened." Marcus turned to face his friend. Tommy had been asking that question for 15 years, never pushing but always there, ready to listen. I don't know anymore. I thought it was. But Detective Morrison says he found evidence that someone else was there. Someone who saw everything and never came forward. Tommy's expression shifted, reading between the lines. Someone who let you carry the blame. For 35 years. The words came out bitter. Marcus began switching off the overhead lights, the familiar routine of closing up now feeling like a last ritual, and now Jerome's son wants me dead for something I might not have even done wrong. Might not have. Marcus stopped at the main switch, his hand hovering over it. In the harsh fluorescent light, he could see every crack in the gym's walls, every repair he and Tommy had made over the years, every sign of the life they'd built from nothing. I was there, Tommy. I was young and scared, and when those men started beating Jerome, I froze. Whether someone else was there or not doesn't change that. Doesn't change that a good man died while I stood there doing nothing. You were 19 years old. I was a professional fighter. I had hands that could kill a man, and I let them beat Jerome to death with baseball bats. Marcus hit the switch, plunging the gym into darkness except for the security lights. His son has every right to hate me. They stood in the shadows, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sweat and dreams deferred. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening routines, families gathering for dinner, kids finishing homework, people living ordinary lives that didn't include the ghosts Marcus carried. So, what's the play? Tommy asked. Marcus had been asking himself the same question. He could meet Ray Morrison, learn what evidence had been buried for decades, maybe finally understand what really happened that night. But the men who just left had made it clear that Ray was already being silenced. And every minute Marcus spent chasing the past was another minute Carlos and Maria stayed in danger. I'm going to Baxter Avenue at 11. Like hell you are. Not alone. Tommy? No. His friend's voice carried the same stubborn strength that had kept the gym running through lean times, that had talked Marcus off ledges when the guilt got too heavy. You spent 35 years thinking you were alone that night. You're not doing it again. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Not fear this time, but something that might have been hope. Or maybe just gratitude that after everything he'd done wrong, someone still thought he was worth saving. They'll kill you too. Maybe. But at least this time, Jerome's son will know exactly what kind of man you really are. Outside, night was falling over Louisville, bringing with it all the secrets that darkness held. In 7 hours, Marcus would finally face the moment that had defined his life. But for the first time in decades, he wouldn't face it alone. Plot twist. They drove to Clifton's Diner in Tommy's rusted pickup, the radio playing soft jazz that did nothing to calm Marcus's nerves. Every few blocks, he found himself checking the side mirrors, looking for cars that followed too closely or shadows that moved wrong. The city lights blurred past like scattered memories, each one holding some fragment of the life he'd built since that night 35 years ago. You sure about this? Tommy asked as they pulled into the diner's parking lot. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting pink and blue shadows across the cracked asphalt. No. Marcus spotted Ray Morrison's car, an old Crown Vic that screamed retired cop even in the dark. But I need to know. The diner was nearly empty, just a few late-shift workers nursing coffee and pie. Ray sat in the back booth as promised, a manila folder thick with papers spread across the table. He looked older than Marcus remembered, gray hair thinning, lines carved deep around his eyes. But those eyes still held the intensity that had made him a good detective. Thunder. Ray stood as they approached, extending a hand that trembled slightly. Jesus, it's good to see you. And you must be Tommy. Heard you've been keeping our boy here out of trouble. Marcus slid into the booth across from Ray, Tommy beside him. The folder seemed to radiate menace, like something that could explode if handled wrong. What did you find? Ray's expression grew grim. He opened the folder, revealing photographs, witness statements, evidence logs, all marked with dates from 1989, started with the digitization project. They were scanning old case files, and the computer flagged inconsistencies in the Washington murder file. Testimony that didn't match the physical evidence. Witness statements that were filed but never followed up on. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. What kind of inconsistencies? The kind that suggests someone wanted this case to stay unsolved. Ray pulled out a photograph, crime scene shots of the alley where Jerome had died. Look at the blood spatter patterns here, and here. He pointed to specific areas. This shows Jerome was beaten by at least 4 people, not 3 like the witnesses claimed. And the angle suggests one of the attackers was significantly taller than the others. Tommy leaned forward. How tall? 6'4", maybe 6'5", professional athlete height. Ray's eyes met Marcus's. The 3 skinheads we arrested were all under 6 feet. The world tilted sideways. Marcus stared at the photographs, seeing details his 19-year-old mind had been too traumatized to process. That's impossible. There were only 3 of them. Ray pulled out another document, a witness statement Marcus had never seen before. This is testimony from Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez. She lived in the apartment building overlooking the alley. Never been interviewed because her statement was buried in the file. Marcus read the faded typewritten words, his hands shaking harder with each line. Saw the colored man get jumped by 3 white boys with bats. Couldn't tell much in the dark, but there was another man there too. Big man, looked colored also. He was standing close enough to help but didn't move. After the white boys ran off, the big man went to the hurt one, knelt down beside him. Looked like they was talking, but too far to hear. Then the big man got up and walked away real quick. The diner around Marcus disappeared. He was back in that alley, feeling Jerome's blood on his hands, hearing the dying man's whispered words. But now the memory felt different, contaminated by this new knowledge. Someone else was there, Marcus whispered. Gets worse. Ray flipped to another page. This is the coroner's report. Cause of death wasn't blunt force trauma from the beating. Jerome Washington died from a single knife wound to the chest, inflicted after the 3 attackers had already left. The papers scattered as Marcus's hands convulsed. What? Someone killed Jerome Washington after the beating. Someone who got close enough to use a blade. Someone he trusted enough to let near him while he was hurt. Ray's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The knife wound was precise, professional, went straight through the ribs to the heart. That takes knowledge, skill. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. You're saying someone I know? I'm saying Jerome Washington was murdered by someone who wanted those white supremacists to take the blame. Someone who used that beating as cover for an assassination. Ray gathered the papers back into the folder. And Marcus, there's one more thing. The witness, Mrs. Vasquez? She gave a description of the second man, said he looked like a boxer, moved like a fighter. Tommy's hand gripped Marcus's shoulder. Marcus, you need to breathe. But Marcus couldn't breathe, because suddenly he was remembering details from that night that he'd buried for 35 years. Jerome hadn't just whispered his daughter's name as he died. He'd said something else, something that Marcus had convinced himself he'd imagined. He said he was my friend. Jerome's actual words, spoken with his last breath. Words that had haunted Marcus's dreams but never made sense until now. Ray, Marcus's voice came out strangled. The man Mrs. Vasquez saw. Did she say anything else about him? Ray nodded grimly. Said he had a scar on his face. Long one, like from a knife fight. The folder slipped from Marcus's numb fingers. He knew that scar. Had known it for 40 years, since they were kids growing up in the same neighborhood, training at the same gym, dreaming the same dreams. Tommy Chen had killed Jerome Washington. And for 35 years, he'd let Marcus believe he was a coward. The diner fell away around Marcus like scenery collapsing on a stage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Across from him, Ray Morrison was still talking, his mouth moving, but the words came from underwater, distorted and meaningless. Tommy's hand remained on his shoulder, the same hand that had held a knife 35 years ago, the same hand that had guided Marcus through depression, helped him build the gym, been there for every important moment since that night. The hand of his best friend, his brother, his betrayer. Marcus, Tommy's voice cut through the white noise in his head. You look like you're about to pass out. He said he was my friend. Jerome's dying words finally made sense. Not Marcus. Jerome had been looking past him, talking to Tommy, recognizing the man who was about to kill him, the man he'd trusted. "I need air." Marcus stumbled out of the booth, pushing past Ray's concerned questions. The diner's front door chimed as he burst through it, the night air hitting his face like a slap. But even outside, he couldn't escape the images flooding back, memories reshaping themselves with this new, horrible knowledge. Tommy following him into the alley that night. Tommy kneeling beside Jerome while Marcus stood frozen. Tommy's voice, calm and reassuring. "It's okay, man. We'll get you help." But there had been no help coming. Only a blade sliding between ribs with surgical precision. The door chimed again. Tommy emerged, his face etched with what Marcus had always interpreted as shared guilt, shared shame. How many conversations had they had over the years about that night? How many times had Tommy listened to Marcus tear himself apart with self-recrimination, never once suggesting that maybe Marcus wasn't the coward he thought he was? "You need to sit down," Tommy said, reaching out. Marcus jerked away like he'd been burned. "Don't touch me." Something flickered across Tommy's face, too quick to interpret, but Marcus caught it, the mask slipping for just an instant before sliding back into place. "What's wrong with you? You're scaring me." 35 years. Marcus's voice came out raw. 35 years you let me believe. Believe what? But Tommy's eyes had gone flat, empty. The warmth that Marcus had depended on for decades simply vanished, leaving behind something cold and calculating. "What exactly do you think you know?" Ray appeared in the doorway, folder clutched against his chest. Even in the dim parking lot light, Marcus could see the older man's confusion, his growing awareness that something had shifted in the last few minutes. "The scar," Marcus whispered. "She saw your scar." Tommy's hand drifted unconsciously to his left cheek, where a thin white line ran from his ear to the corner of his mouth. The scar he'd gotten in a knife fight when they were 17. The scar that had made him distinctive enough for a witness to remember 35 years later. "A lot of people have scars, Marcus. Not like that one. Not in the right place, on the right face, on someone who was standing in that alley watching Jerome Washington die." Marcus took a step back, putting distance between them. "You killed him. You let those white boys beat him, and then you finished the job." The silence stretched between them like a blade. In the distance, traffic hummed along Bardstown Road. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that Marcus's entire world was collapsing in a diner parking lot in Clifton. When Tommy finally spoke, his voice held no trace of the friend Marcus had known. "Jerome Washington was dealing drugs to kids, Marcus. Selling to 13-year-olds outside middle schools. The police knew, but they couldn't touch him. Too many connections, too much protection. Someone had to stop him. So you appointed yourself judge and jury?" "I saved lives. How many kids didn't get hooked because Jerome couldn't push anymore? How many families stayed together?" Tommy's eyes gleamed with the fervor of a true believer. "You were always too soft, Marcus, too willing to look the other way when good people got hurt." Marcus felt sick, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that he'd never really known the man standing in front of him. The Tommy Chen he'd thought he knew, loyal, protective, haunted by the same demons, had been a fiction, a performance crafted to keep Marcus close, keep him controllable. "The gym," Marcus said slowly. "All these years helping me build it, staying close to me. Penance." Tommy shrugged like he was discussing the weather. "Figured I owed you something for letting you carry the guilt. Besides, it worked out. You became exactly what the neighborhood needed. Just took a little guidance." Ray cleared his throat behind them. "I'm calling this in. Both of you need to—" The gunshot split the night like thunder. Ray Morrison crumpled to the asphalt, the folder spilling its contents across the parking lot, decades of buried truth scattering in the wind. Tommy lowered the pistol, his face calm as death. "Sorry, Marcus. But some secrets are worth killing for." The echo of the gunshot hung in the air like a curse. Marcus dropped to his knees beside Ray, pressing his hands against the spreading crimson on the detective's chest. Ray's eyes were wide, conscious but fading, his mouth working soundlessly as blood frothed at the corners. "Ray, stay with me." Marcus's voice cracked. Around them, scattered police documents fluttered in the night breeze like wounded birds. 35 years of buried truth bleeding out onto cracked asphalt. Tommy stood over them both, the pistol steady in his hand. "Move away from him, Marcus. He's dying." He was already dead. The moment he decided to dig up the past, Tommy's voice held the same casual tone he'd used discussing gym equipment or weekend plans. "Some things need to stay buried." Marcus looked up at the man who'd been his anchor for decades, searching for any trace of the friend he'd trusted with his life, his secrets, his soul. He found nothing but cold calculation. How many others? Others? How many other Jerome Washingtons? How many people did you decide deserved to die? Marcus kept pressure on Ray's wound, feeling the detective's life pulsing away beneath his palms. "Was it always you, Tommy? The neighborhood vigilante?" Tommy's smile was razor thin. Someone had to do the hard work. The police are hamstrung by rules, by lawyers, by bureaucrats who've never watched a 12-year-old overdose in a school bathroom. But I understood what real justice looked like. The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Every unsolved murder in their neighborhood over the past 35 years. Every drug dealer who'd disappeared, every pedophile found dead in an alley, every problem that had somehow vanished overnight. Marcus had always assumed it was gang warfare, police corruption, the chaos of urban decay. But it had been Tommy, always Tommy, moving through the shadows like a ghost, deciding who lived and who died with surgical precision. "Jerome wasn't a drug dealer," Marcus whispered. "No, that was a lie I told myself at first, made it easier to sleep." Tommy shrugged. "Truth is, Jerome saw me coming out of Danny Rodriguez's apartment the night I put a bullet in Danny's head. Wrong place, wrong time. He was going to talk to the police, so I had to make him disappear." Ray's breathing grew more shallow. His hand found Marcus's wrist, gripping with desperate strength. "Your son," he wheezed. "Your son knows." Tommy's expression darkened. "What son?" But Marcus understood. Jerome's son, David Washington, had spent decades investigating his father's death. Decades uncovering the same evidence Ray had found. The attacks on Marcus, the beatings, the psychological warfare. It hadn't been random violence or misguided revenge. David Washington had been trying to force the truth into the open, make Marcus remember details from that night that would expose Tommy. "He's been watching us," Marcus said. "Watching you. He knows what you did." Then David Washington just became another problem that needs solving. Tommy raised the pistol, aiming it at Marcus's chest. Just like his father, just like Detective Morrison, just like you, Marcus felt time crystallize around him. The same moment of perfect clarity he'd experienced in the ring when everything slowed down and he could see exactly where his opponent's punch was going to land. But this time, instead of freezing with fear and guilt, he moved. 35 years of self-doubt and recrimination fell away like shed skin. Marcus Thunder Williams, not the broken man who'd carried unearned shame, but the champion who'd fought his way from nothing to the top of the world, exploded upward from his crouch beside Ray's body. Tommy's shot went wide as Marcus's shoulder drove into his midsection. They crashed into the side of a parked car, the pistol spinning away across the asphalt. Tommy recovered quickly. He'd always been fast, even at 58, but Marcus was ready for him. The first punch landed like a sledgehammer against Tommy's ribs, driven by decades of suppressed rage. Tommy doubled over, gasping, then came back with an uppercut that caught Marcus on the chin. Stars exploded behind Marcus's eyes, but he rolled with it, letting the momentum carry him into a devastating hook that snapped Tommy's head sideways. They fought like the street kids they'd once been, all technique abandoned in favor of pure violence. Tommy pulled a knife. Of course he had a knife, the same tool he'd used to kill Jerome. But Marcus caught his wrist, twisting until bones cracked and the blade fell. "This is for Jerome," Marcus growled, driving his fist into Tommy's solar plexus. "This is for Ray." Another punch, this one breaking Tommy's nose with an audible crack. "This is for 35 years of lies." Tommy crumpled against the car, blood streaming down his face. "You don't understand," he gasped. "Everything I did, it made you stronger, made you better. The guilt shaped you into the man the neighborhood needed." Marcus stood over his oldest friend, his betrayer, his tormentor. In the distance, sirens were approaching. Someone had called the police. Ray's breathing had stopped, but his sacrifice had finally brought the truth into the light. "The only thing your guilt ever did," Marcus said quietly, "was teach me what real justice looks like." The first police car arrived 3 minutes after Tommy stopped breathing. Marcus sat on the curb beside Ray Morrison's body, his knuckles split and bleeding, watching the crime scene unfold around him like a movie he wasn't part of. Red and blue lights painted the diner parking lot in alternating waves of color, transforming the mundane strip mall into something alien and otherworldly. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Tommy despite the name, crouched beside him with a notepad, her questions gentle but persistent. Marcus answered mechanically, his voice flat and distant. Yes, he'd killed Tommy in self-defense. Yes, Ray Morrison had been murdered while trying to expose a 35-year-old cover-up. Yes, Tommy Chen had confessed to multiple homicides before pulling the gun. But the words felt hollow, inadequate. How did you explain that your oldest friend had been a monster? How did you describe the moment when 35 years of carefully constructed reality collapsed into dust? They found Tommy's apartment later that night, a shrine to methodical violence. Newspaper clippings of unsolved murders spanning 4 decades, each one marked with dates and locations in Tommy's meticulous handwriting. Photographs of targets, surveillance notes, weapons wrapped in plastic and labeled like museum pieces. The police would eventually connect him to 47 deaths, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in Louisville's history. Marcus learned these details in fragments over the following weeks, sitting in interview rooms that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. FBI agents flew in from Washington. Prosecutors talked about book deals and movie rights. The media descended like vultures, turning the Thunder Boxing Gym into a tourist attraction for the morbidly curious. He sold the gym on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 months after that night in the parking lot. The new owner was a physical therapy company that planned to gut the interior and install modern equipment. Marcus signed the papers in 15 minutes, then walked through the empty space one final time. The heavy bags hung silent and still. The ring where he'd taught hundreds of kids to fight, really fight, with honor and discipline, sat bathed in dusty sunlight from the high windows. He could almost hear the echo of gloves against leather, the shuffle of feet on canvas, the sound of young voices learning that strength meant protecting people, not hurting them. "Everything I did, it made you stronger." Tommy's words haunted him still, not because they were true, but because of how easily Marcus might have believed them. How many nights had he lain awake wondering if his cowardice had somehow been justified by the man he'd become afterward. The guilt had shaped him, certainly, but into something smaller than he should have been, not larger. The memorial service for Ray Morrison filled Mount Carmel Baptist Church to overflowing. Marcus sat in the back row, listening to testimonials from the lives Ray had touched, the cases he'd solved, the families he'd given closure. Ray's daughter spoke about her father's obsession with justice, his belief that truth had a weight of its own that would eventually surface no matter how deep it was buried. David Washington found Marcus outside the church afterward. Jerome's son was 58 now, gray-haired and worn down by decades of searching for answers. They stood in the spring sunshine, 2 men who'd been shaped by the same violence, finally seeing each other clearly. "I'm sorry," David said, "for what I put you through. The attacks, the harassment. I thought you were protecting him." Marcus nodded. "I was protecting him, just not the way you thought." They didn't shake hands or embrace. Some wounds were too deep for easy gestures. But David's nod carried the weight of understanding, of a burden finally shared instead of carried alone. Marcus left Louisville the next week. He bought a small house in Portland, Oregon, close enough to the mountains to remember what clean air tasted like. No forwarding address, no social media, no connections to the life he'd built on a foundation of lies. He got a job at a community center, teaching basic self-defense to seniors and running a grief counseling group for people who'd lost family members to violence. The nightmares came less frequently now. When they did, Jerome Washington's face was peaceful instead of accusatory. Sometimes Marcus dreamed of Ray Morrison, still alive, filing away evidence in manila folders that never quite seemed to fill up. Sometimes he dreamed of the kids from his gym, all grown up, teaching their own children how to throw a proper jab. On good days, He didn't dream at all. 5 years after that night in the parking lot, Marcus stood on his back porch watching snow fall on the Cascade Mountains. The coffee in his hands had gone cold an hour ago, but he held onto the mug anyway, letting its weight anchor him to the present moment. Somewhere in Louisville, the Thunder Boxing Gym was now a physical therapy clinic. Somewhere in that city, other secrets were buried, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them up. But those weren't his secrets anymore, weren't his responsibility to carry or resolve. He'd learned what real justice looked like, finally. Sometimes it meant fighting, sometimes it meant walking away. But it always meant telling the truth, even when the truth destroyed everything you thought you knew about yourself. The snow kept falling, covering the world in clean, forgiving white.